Hey, indie filmmakers, I'm Griffin Hammond.
And I'm Nick Bodmer, and on this week's episode, we're playing excerpts from a speech Griffin gave to college students with his career advice.
Plus, your questions about the ethics of color grading, what bitrate to export video, and why I sliced off part of my lens. Hey, Nick, how you doing?
I'm good, Griffin. How are you?
Pretty good. So, last time we had an episode, I played you some clips from a speech that you were actually at. We were both at NAB, and I gave my Panasonic presentation.
Yes, very nice.
So
and
today
that was on Facebook, right? People had the option to go watch that.
Yeah, that was a Facebook Live video, and you were there in person. But you did not get to see the speech that I gave before that when I was at Illinois State University. I actually gave two presentations at our alma mater about, one was about career advice, one was about documentary filmmaking. And I thought today I might share some of those things with you because, one, I know that you are good at like calling me on like like if the stuff I'm saying is not correct.
BS?
Yeah, on BS. So I guess I just want to run some segments from this speech today past you and see what you think, if you think it sounds right or not.
Okay. It sounds good.
And it's
so you're
all,
saying I get to rip into you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully not. Hopefully everything I said was perfect advice for college students nearing graduation.
All right, let's find out.
So the speech that I gave at the School of Communication was part of this thing called Com Week, and so it was all for communication majors. And I'll just play you the beginning of the introduction that my former professor, Dr. John McHale, he actually taught me a lot about documentary filmmaking. I just want to play the intro that he talked about with me. It's about a required class that I was trying to get into. His course was required, and his class was full, and he wasn't sure he wanted to let me in.
He took my doc class, and he only showed up about 50–60% of the time. So then he contacted me and said, can I get an override at 161? And I said, no, unless you're going to come to class more. And he said, I promise to come to class more. And this guy came to class, and he participated, he had a good attitude.
All right, so let me understand this. You needed to get into this class that was full, and you needed the instructor's permission to do so, but you had taken a previous class and not shown up very often? Am I understanding that correctly?
I didn't even remember this. He led with this story, but he's right. I guess I took his one of his documentary classes. I guess I didn't show up very much, and then I needed to get into 161, which is like the media writing class that everyone in the School of Comm has to take, and I needed his override. I don't remember back then. Did I not go to class?
Well, I thought you had kind of gotten that out of your system by this time, but apparently not.
Yeah, because I had failed out of film school at NYU for not going to class, and by the time I got to ISU, I think I thought I was on the straight and narrow by then.
So this was your undergrad, not your graduate degree? Yeah, I'm taking it.
This was
you
undergrad.
Really stepped it up by the time you got to your graduate degree. Well, that just tells you you got to be careful who you piss off because you might need their help sometime.
Right?
Soon.
Yeah. Well, and that was kind of the theme.
In.
Yeah, he let me in, and that was kind of the theme of the talk was the things you need out of college versus the things you think you need out of college. And I think one of the big things I did need and was useful for me was meeting a lot of faculty members, and those were the people that led to career opportunities later. And
also maybe, punctuality and just showing up when you say you're going to show up.
Well, yeah, what do they say?
Lessons.
Don't they say like showing up is 90% of
something
success? I don't know. So let me just play you the beginning of my talk where I talk about the title, because I don't think I told you what this speech was titled. The title of my presentation today, it's I'm Naive and Lack Ambition, How I Crafted a Career Anyway. I'm very, very happy with where my career is right now, and I'll show you what I've been doing recently, but I've also realized by now that I have no idea what opportunities are available to me, and I have not known the whole time. I've been completely in the dark and making it up as I go, and I have no idea what I want to do, but that's okay. So if you're like me and you're not ambitious and you don't know what your career is going to be, I hope you find some solace in me today that there's still a path forward for you, and I want to talk about what that path is.
You're naive and lack ambition.
Yeah, that's what they put on the posters.
Really?
Yeah.
So explain that. What do you mean by naive?
Well, I wonder if you agree with this, but I mean, I've accepted by now that all of the jobs I've had, I didn't know they existed, and I keep discovering that video is it can be a much broader career if you're willing to be a little bit flexible about that definition. Like, if you only want a Hollywood job, then that's one path. But if you recognize that everyone needs video, there's a lot of interesting jobs out there. And I just know that I don't have enough life experience or knowledge to even know what they are. So I just have to accept that I'm naive and I'm unambitious. I don't even know what I want out of my life and career, but I've found some success just kind of learning as I go.
Now, see, to me, unambitious sounds like you just would rather sit at home and play Zelda, which may be the case. but I don't think that really describes you, right? What's a better word than unambitious? You're not...
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I have a good work ethic, and I like to work, and I like to produce. But I guess I say that I lack ambition because I know there are people who know what they want out of their career, and they chase that thing. And I don't know what that thing is, and I don't chase it. Like, I don't have an end goal in mind.
And this leaves you open to opportunities that you think might otherwise not make themselves available to you if you were so focused on something very specific. Is that accurate?
I think so, yeah. And I also just hope that people who don't, they maybe feel like they have no direction in their career, that's okay. There's still a way forward.
Sure. And I think maybe that explains the situation you find yourself in right now. You're done at Bloomberg Politics, and I haven't gotten a huge sense of urgency from you to go find something else. You're kind of just willing to just kind of see what happens and what opens up before you, and now you're traveling with the State Department and working with Panasonic, and you don't seem real interested in locking yourself down to just the next thing that shows up. You're leaving yourself open to possibility.
Yeah, I think I'm discovering right now that being in New York, having done the work I did at Bloomberg, is already leading to a lot of things. I mean, there are things I'm doing now, but there's also videos that I did at Bloomberg are getting me calls about jobs, and I'm getting a bunch of inquiries about things. So I'm trying not to rush into any one of them because it seems like over the next few months I'll have several opportunities to weigh against each other. So I don't want to jump on the first one.
That's awesome. I think that's a great message for college students who might be just going, what am I doing with my life, and what is going to happen? And the answer is you don't know, but not knowing what, let's see, how do I say this? You don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And just being open to what happens, I think is great advice.
Well, and a big part of this presentation I gave was me actually showing them my resume and just saying, every job that I have here, I mean, I kind of walked them through how I got each job, but every job I got through word of mouth. Like, someone thought of me for it. I didn't really apply for any of these jobs, so I didn't know about any of them. None of, they didn't exist in my worldview until someone recommended me for them. But one thing I did when I showed them my resume was I took them to the education part. And I said, look, I have a master's from Illinois State University. I have a bachelor's from Illinois State University. This was the school I was speaking at. And then I showed them the NYU section, and I asked them if they could just figure out what was missing. Does anyone notice anything weird about the bullet point for NYU? Looks different than the others? What do you see that's different?
No degree.
Short.
It's short.
No degree.
No degree.
Speech team.
Yeah, I was on speech team. Yeah, I was there for 2 years. You don't see any mention of a degree. Anyone want to guess what happened to me? I did leave, not under my my own wanting. I failed out of NYU.
Family crisis.
Yeah, you could spin your life's failures however you want. I spin it as, hey, I studied at this prestigious film school. I'm not going to tell you that I didn't graduate. Nick, have you done any creative resume writing?
Of course. I think everybody has, right? Got to make your jobs and things sound a little more prestigious when you're out on the job hunt. Sure.
Well, and especially at this point in my career, I feel like I have enough content under my belt. I mean, there's plenty of videos I could show people, and so just necessarily when you're building a resume or explaining to someone what you do, you can highlight the things you're really proud of and kind of diminish the things that hold you back.
Absolutely. And also, we've learned you should really go to class.
Right, yeah. But you can also recover from failing out of film school. But another thing I've discovered, another thing I talked about in a later presentation that same day, was that you have a lot of power in what you call yourself. Mm-hmm. And I've decided to start calling myself a documentary filmmaker. I didn't always do that. And actually, we got a YouTube comment that's about this from Pegleg Media. He asked, I've got a question. When did you start going by documentary filmmaker, and was that on purpose? I know Sriracha was a documentary, but as a fellow film fighter, I always thought of you as just a filmmaker, and that your first film just happened to be a documentary. Is that what you mainly want to film, or is that what people just started calling you? So right now I call myself a documentary filmmaker, and that's like what I write on my resume and my Twitter bio and stuff. I'm not purely a documentary filmmaker. I make comedy videos, I make tutorial videos, I make all sorts of things, and I guess I've just decided that documentary is kind of the style that I usually am. And it also seems to be, I mean, I wanted to be that, that's what I wanted to call myself, but it does seem to be the title that's working the best in my career. Like, if I call myself a professional videographer, which I did for a long time, I'm getting very different kinds of work. I feel like I'm getting more respect by being in New York and calling myself a documentary filmmaker. But a lot of that is just my creation of my own story. So I've always known that you have a lot of power, especially just when you're creating a resume, to tell your own story and to shape your own story the way you want.
What do they call that? Self-actualization? You know, you are what you believe you are. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and I liked documentaries. I like watching them, and I wanted to be able to call myself a filmmaker, and so I, just made Sriracha and then started calling myself a documentary filmmaker.
Yeah, and here you are doing documentary film work all over the place.
Yeah, and I do think it's the kinds of job offers I'm getting right now are coming to me in part because of my experience, and people are saying nice things about me. But when people go to my website and they see that it's documentary filmmaker, and like if that's the kind of thing they're looking for, especially in journalism, I think it's helping me get interest from those kinds of companies.
Sure. Yeah, no, makes tons of sense. No BS to call yet. I'm still waiting. We'll get there. I'll find something.
So Dr. McHale asked me if I had always wanted to shoot video.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you know you wanted to shoot and produce video?
I've always loved video, so I did know that this is my career I wanted to do. In high school, I definitely thought I wanted to be a director and a screenwriter, like the very stereotypical what a Hollywood job is. I've since learned that wasn't for me, and I've learned that there are a lot of video jobs out there. Do you remember that high school version of me?
I do. I feel like that version of you isn't that different.
No.
Than what
I just
you
remember
are today.
Back then I was reading a lot of books about like directing and screenwriting, and I think I did picture myself like going down the traditional Hollywood route.
Sure. It's a little hard to imagine now, isn't it? What that would be like.
Yeah, I just don't think I would have been happy. I think it took me a few years of going to NYU and just kind of discovering the things that I actually like, discovering my own style.
Well, and I wondered, does the internet and YouTube change that too, right? Because I feel like you've always kind of wanted people to see your work. And, the internet was really just getting going as a means of distributing video to everybody.
Oh, yeah. And college was an interesting time because I was in film school, but then I was also doing film fights on the side. And so you have film school where I'm making, I feel like I had a decent amount of experience as a video editor, having done it in high school. But in college, I'm taking these kind of like, I'm learning to edit again, making these projects that only my people in my classes are seeing. And then I'm going over to film fights and I'm making things the way that I used to make them in high school with the camera I have and the editing software I have. And it's going out to the world and people are seeing it. And so there probably was something more appealing about doing it myself.
Yeah, you gravitated towards one and not the other.
I think I was doing one at the expense of the other, not going to class. So the irony of not like failing out of one school is that I ended up getting a master's degree at Illinois State University, which arguably I do not need at all. No one cares in my career that I have this degree, But grad school turned out to be really important for me, not because no one cares that I have a master's degree. It's never been important on my resume. All the jobs I've had don't need that. But it let me spend 2 more years very closely with this faculty. And I've since realized about college that no one cares what my GPA was. No one ever asked me that. Even now, 8 years or 10 years out from my bachelor's, no one cares what college I went to. I'm not even sure they really care if I have a degree anymore. It's like, by now, it doesn't matter. I have experience. But all of that doesn't matter. I hope you graduate. That's important. But the real thing you need out of this school is working with other students, gaining their experience. I picked up a lot of PR skills while I was here, even though I wasn't a PR major. And it's turned out I've needed that to sell myself in my career and sell my videos. And I gained a lot of great relationships with faculty. And those faculty relationships have turned into jobs. I didn't know that's what would happen, but it has. Do you feel like you're at a place where you no longer need your GPA or even your degree? Do you have enough experience now in your career?
Yeah, I think so. I guess maybe the kind of career I'm in, I mean, they want to see some sort of degree, but again, I have a degree in theater and I work in IT sales, right? You know, I'm a sales engineer. So it's always a fun conversation starter, but that's about it. I mean, so
that's a great point, though, is like all you need is that checkbox. You have a degree, you went to college, but no one cares that you have a theater degree. Right.
And thankfully, no one has ever asked for my GPA.
Right.
I don't think that would be good, but we don't need to talk about that part of it.
I got a really funny question in the middle of the presentation. I told people they could just like shout out a question if they wanted. And I was showing an Indie Mogul video, the one where I made the DIY video light. Mm-hmm. And this guy just asked me if that's what made my beard look more red. Yeah.
Is it the light that made your beard so red?
I don't know. I actually used to up the color saturation on a lot of my videos because I'm so pale, and I just wanted my face to look human. It looks a little bit redder when you up the color saturation.
Is to make yourself not look like a ghost.
Right. Especially when you throw a lot of light on me, I look even whiter than normal.
You are one of the whitest people I know.
Yeah, so I try not to overexpose myself. I try to get color where I can.
That's funny. And the side effect is you really get a deep, rich beard.
So there's a part of my presentation that I feel like will resonate with podcast listeners. Well, and you too, because you're always harping on me for talking about sriracha too much 3 years later. This film turned out to be the most important thing I've ever done in my career. It's still paying dividends today. It came out in 2013. And when I say paying, I mean literally money, but also, more importantly, all of the opportunities that it's still giving me. I'm still getting career opportunities because of this film. It's become kind of my calling card. And I feel a little bit weird that it's been 3 years since it came out, and I'm still milking it, but it's working for me. So I don't know when I'll stop talking about it.
I mean, I give you a hard time about it, but of course you talk about it. It was a great success, and it continues to be an important part of your resume and, you know, what you're known for. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll give you a pass this time only. All right. Next time you mention it, I'm still going to give you a hard time because that's more fun. But
well, and later in the day when I was talking more specifically about documentary filmmaking, I actually told a little story about making that film. Someone asked me about doing man on the street interviews, you know, just walking up to people.
God, that's the worst, isn't it?
I actually mentioned the time that you were involved in. You and Kristen helped me.
Yeah.
And I'm terrible at that. I hate talking to people like that. I hate asking people. I feel like I'm intruding and imposing on people. So I usually bring along a much more extroverted person to do that, and that goes a lot better. And in Chicago, we found the best way was just to walk around and taste of Chicago with just a sriracha bottle, and people just seem to go, "Hey, I love that stuff." And we go, "All right." And I recently did a screening of the film, and someone asked me why I didn't show like all the people that hate sriracha. Like, why didn't I tell the dark side of the story? It's like, I don't think there are people that hate it. I mean, there's maybe people that don't care for it, but no one's passionately against it. So, that extroverted person that we brought along, neither you or I are good at just walking up to people and asking them questions. But your wife, Kristen,
yeah, she was like, "I'll do it. Let's go."
yeah, she has much better energy than us.
I don't know what it is, because I think I am an extroverted person, and I would probably say you are too, right? It's this weird Midwest imposition thing. I don't know. I see what you're saying there.
People call me extroverted, but I think of myself as pretty introverted because I guess I am comfortable like in a presentation situation, giving a speech, but I don't know. I'm that's like the only extroverted thing I'm okay with, and I guess making videos, but. Most of the time, I get kind of tired from social interaction. I need like my alone time just to recover, and it's stressful to like walk up to people and ask them to be part of something when they don't know they yet want to be part of it.
Sure. All right, what's next?
So, I guess this is another thing that undercuts my theory that I'm not extroverted. I showed them a clip of me rapping.
Yeah, the Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
All right.
I was just trying to show them that you never know what might lead to work. But Mark said, "Well, wait, what about the video where you're rapping?" And I was like, "No, what are you talking about? This is like the one video I did not want them to see or expect them to see." But Mark had done his own research on me and found this video. And as it turns out, this is what got me the job. I did not think they would care about this. But I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it's super embarrassing for me. I'm going to show you like 10 seconds of it. We're jumping right to the middle of it.
Got 2 Harvard degrees, offshore dollars from these Bain private equities. Immigrants disagree with GOP policy, but dad's born in Mexico, I Papi Romney.
All right, that's good. A video like that, I never thought that would lead to a job. And it did. That's exactly what Mark wanted to see. It shows that I understood the nuances of the previous election, that I could have some fun with it. I keep discovering over and over and over again in my career that the best thing I can do is make a lot of work, make sure people are aware of it, build an audience online, show my friends and family what I can do. The more that people understand what I'm capable of, when opportunities come along, ask me, they'll hire me. And you never know which thing is going to have a return on investment later, so just try everything.
I think there's a Shakira song from the movie Zootopia called Try Everything, which we should insert right now.
Yeah,
There.
I think I've made a lot of varied work in my career.
And I think you hit on something important there. Is you've always been very good at making sure people see what you do. Like that's always been a skill you've honed over the years. Like for Film Fights, I think you were really good at getting out the vote for your videos and making sure people were watching and using the internet to distribute.
Well, and I think what I've learned is that you don't need to have 1 million followers. You don't need to build a huge audience. I mean, that certainly leads to exciting things down the road. But just making sure your network of people, your friends and family, are aware of what you're capable of, when they hear about a job opportunity, they'll come talk to you about it because they know what your talents are. I've decided that my career philosophy is do the best work that I can and do a lot of it. Make sure that people see that work. Make sure that I'm super nice to everyone because I don't think it matters. I'm definitely not the best in most of the fields that I work in. There are way more talented filmmakers, especially in New York now that I live there. But I think that people like working with me and that helps a lot. Then be willing to say yes. Be flexible in your life and be willing to say yes to the opportunities that maybe don't sound like exactly what you want. I think my advice for college students especially is don't wait for the perfect job to come along because all of my jobs have been amazing for me. I've loved them and I didn't know anything about them when they started. And I think if you are looking for the job that meets all the criteria, everything you learned in school, if you're looking for a job that utilizes you for that, you may not find it. I mean, there's plenty of you applying for jobs right now. There's a lot of competition. So you may not get the perfect job, but you can get in the door at a job and really show them what your skill set is. And you can job craft, which is a term I didn't know about until like 2 years ago. That I've done that at every single job I had. At Bloomberg, I was the only shooter editor on my team. And so it was just kind of like whatever I want to do, I can do.
I made the job what I wanted it to be. I said, I want to do a lot of travel. I'll get on that plane. I'll go follow Bernie Sanders around. They let me do that. So just go somewhere, do the things you like to do, and you'll be amazed what kinds of things come from it.
Is that BS?
No, I don't think so, unfortunately. I was hoping. But, I mean, I think job crafting is exactly right. You know, getting your foot in the door. Like, you started out where? State Farm was your first? And you were in, like, PR, social media?
Yeah, my job was an internship at State Farm monitoring social media.
And somehow you kind of turned that into a video production job. Like, you were all of a sudden working with William Shatner on videos for State Farm. How did you do that?
Well, so the PR department at State Farm was doing some video production in-house. A lot of the people came from a news background, so some of them knew how to shoot. But there just wasn't the level of talent in video production that I knew I could bring. So I just started asking if I could come along on shoots and help out. And I think after I made a couple of videos, people saw what I was capable of and wanted to utilize that skill.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of BS there that, like, I think maybe I'm overly optimistic about you can't just land any job. You can't, like, land the pizza delivery job and start making videos and hope that the CEO of Domino's, like, I mean, that could happen. But some jobs are going to be less receptive to your skills than others. But I think a lot of good companies, they recognize talent wherever they can. So you have an opportunity. Yeah,
and I think a lot of it has to do with the people you're going to be working with, right? So that's what I look for in a job, is who is going to be my team, who am I reporting to? You know, those kind of things are really going to affect what your opportunities are moving forward.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've job crafted in your career?
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe
had you heard that term before?
I don't. I actually, I'm going to say no, I haven't, but it immediately made so much sense that it almost feels like a word I've known for a long time, so I'm not sure. But it makes a ton of sense. I've kind of career crafted, maybe by jumping careers a little bit more often than some people, and jumping between lots of different kinds of career options and not just staying in one path, and has kind of gotten me where I want to be. So maybe a slightly different take on it. But no, I think absolutely you have to look at what your skills are and what you want your skills to be, and find a way to push yourself in that direction wherever you're working.
That's a good point. Well, in just a moment, we're answering your questions about the ethics of color grading, what bitrate to export video, and why I sliced part of my lens off. Nick, you've heard about my event coming up in Los Angeles?
Yeah, it's Sammy's camera, right?
Yeah, and I actually have a second event the next day in Riverside, California.
Of course you do.
One's in Los Angeles on the west side of the state, and if you go a couple hours inland, you're in Riverside. So depending on which one's closer, you can either go to the Sammy's Camera event on Saturday, or we're doing an event on Sunday, May 21st at Image1 Camera and Video. Same workshop, all-day documentary filmmaking workshop. Starts at 9:30 a.m. And you have to check out the show notes at Hey.film, because the guy Shadi, who owns Image1 Camera and Video, is a really cool guy. I met him at NAB, and he's done like a whole vehicle wrap for his van promoting this event.
Wow.
And he also has a billboard too for it. So
how fancy.
I'm really excited to see that. And just like both of these events, it's a $99 event, but you, in both cases, get a gift card for that store. So if you want to put that $99 towards a purchase of just about anything, I think, at those camera stores, you can.
Very cool. That's only 3.5 hours away from me. I could hop on down and be in Riverside.
Oh yeah, you're closer to Riverside, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I'll see you there.
Probably not. Let's be honest.
You're not really a 3.5 hour travel kind of guy.
Not to hear you talk. I have to listen to you all the time.
Yeah.
But no, guys, he's good. Don't worry. It'll be great.
All right, let's answer some questions.
Let's answer some questions. We got a YouTube comment from Joshua Stokes Films. If he's making a documentary, he wants to know if he can still color grade his footage with a film look, or is it being unfaithful to the audience and wrong? So this is our ethical question about color grading.
Yeah, and I think especially when making documentaries, it's really important to think about ethics and think about how are you portraying truth to the audience and are you doing it in a faithful way. But I certainly think that color grading falls in the category of completely okay. Don't you?
I would agree, but I'm guessing, you know, like if you're doing a documentary on the Crayola factory, you might want to stay true to color. But for most films, I think absolutely I mean, any documentary is going to have a point of view and a position it's taking, and you know, your artistic outlook on the visuals of the film is going to be part of that.
Well, yeah, I think it's easy to think the documentary should be perfectly true, but there's a fallacy there because no documentary is perfectly objective. You're already making a lot of creative choices just in where you point the camera and how are you capturing audio, all of these things. So there's a whole level of art on documentary, and I think as long as you're portraying a story the way that it was in real life, I think you have that latitude to be artistic and make it stylistic.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, our next question is a Vimeo message from Chris, who is exporting some stuff in 4K and HD, and he seems like he's fine with aspect ratio, frame rate, all those exporting choices. The thing that confuses him is bitrate, because he feels like he's exporting out of Adobe Premiere, uploading it, and it just doesn't look great when it gets there. So he's just wondering what advice to give him on bitrate.
Sure. You know, I don't know about 4K bitrate. I'm going to have to ask you about that. But, I mean, bitrate is just the amount of data that it's using. You know, it's usually expressed in like a megabits per second, which is just how much data is being used at any given time to describe what's in the frame. So
yeah,
a higher bitrate is going to be a higher quality, but of course, larger file size and longer upload times and processing times and things like that. So there's definitely a balance. You know, if you're
and bitrates will be different for different kinds of files.
Sure. Like
it's encoded differently. So usually when we're talking about the web, we're talking about H.264 encoding,
yep, which
is also the same encoding that many of the cameras use. Like the GH5 is recording in an H.264 codec as well. So it's not like shooting ProRes.
Yep.
I imagine the bit rates are very different for ProRes.
Absolutely.
But what I've found is that for the web, or even for broadcast, like if you're doing 1080 video, I've always found that 15 megabits per second is considered broadcast quality. It's not perfect. There's going to be some compression artifacts, but like that's good enough for cable television, okay. 15 megabits per second. So what I usually do for like the podcast, I'll usually do around 8 megabits per second in a 1080 file.
Sure.
But if I really, like if we're on the road and my internet speed is slow, sometimes I'll drop it as low as 5 megabits because I feel like I'm not going to sacrifice that much quality, but the file size will be significantly smaller than 8 megabits.
Sure. I always, as just kind of a frame of reference, I think like Netflix recommends 5 megabits a second minimum speed for their HD video.
Yeah. And then with like hand cut shot in 4K 60p, I exported that at 100 megabits per second, which I think was probably overkill. Mm-hmm. Because I think most people have told me that for 4K, something around 20 megabits is pretty good. And I know that YouTube is going to create its own transcode from that, so sometimes I feel okay uploading a little bit higher quality when I'm really concerned about the quality of the piece.
Yep. Sounds like good advice.
And it's actually pretty related to a question we got, a YouTube comment we got from Rhett Brown, and he was talking about, we've been talking about on the show MP4 versus MOV, and he specifically points out some of the different formats that the GH5 records in. He was looking at the manual, page 55, or 57 specifically. And he says that MP4 says it's for playing back on PC. He says that seems vague. And then MOV states that it's a data format for image editing. And he chose MOV for that reason. But he was wondering, is there really a difference between these two? And is there one that's better for color grading?
Well, this gets into containers versus codecs, which I think we've touched on before, but it's always a confusing thing. So these are container formats, and
the MOV and the MP4.
That's right, and those basically describe the metadata of how the data inside is contained, but it doesn't affect the encoding of the video. So
Right.
on the GH5 in particular, we're using H.264 as the codec, and that's exactly the same in MOV and MP4. So it does not affect the video quality at all. It doesn't affect your ability to color grade. It really just is, what is your computer more comfortable playing back? But the actual data is going to be exactly the same. Interestingly, though, I did do a little bit of research, and there are differences in the audio recording options in the two container formats. So the MP4 doesn't support the highest audio quality codecs, and MOV does. So if you want to record at 48 kilohertz or 96 kilohertz in 24-bit, you have to be in movie mode. And that's just a...
And you're talking specifically about the GH5?
I'm talking specifically about the GH5 here. Yep, exactly.
Because one thing I noticed in Rhett's comment is that kind of applies to the camera you're shooting with, the GH3. He seems to think that the MP4 is lower quality than the MOV, which it is on the GH3. On the GH5, they added like a high-quality MP4 format, which is equivalent to the MOV.
Sure.
Except for the audio you just mentioned. But on your GH3, there's an MP4 mode, and there's also a lower res, or like lower bitrate MP4 mode on the GH5. There's actually 4 modes you can go to: AVC HD, MP4, a second MP4 with LPCM audio, and that's the higher bitrate. But if you actually go into each of these, you'll see like the MP4 LPCM mode in the GH5 has bit rates as high as 150 megabits per second that it's shooting in. And that's the same as the MOV. So I think the max bit rate you can get right now on this camera is 150 megabits per second. So that's interesting. We're shooting in 150 megabits, and then when we're exporting, I'm dropping it down to like 15 or something. So a very significant difference in the shooting acquisition format and the web delivery.
And do you know that 150 megabits per second, is that a constant bit rate or a variable bit rate? Now we're getting way into the weeds. I'm going to guess it's a constant bit rate for since we're recording.
I think it's constant-ish. I think I've tested some of these. Like you could just, you could shoot a file and then open up the file on your computer and see what the final bit rate was. And I find it's usually a little bit lower. So I think it's probably a max bit rate, but it's kind of like a target bit rate. That's what it's going for. Okay. But if you do want to save file size on the camera, that lower bitrate MP4 mode, I'll pop into that real quick on the GH5. It gives you a couple choices. You can shoot 100 megabits per second in 4K, or you could shoot 28 megabits per second in 1080 HD. So you could really lower the bitrate if you wanted
to stretch those SD cards.
Yeah. And arguably, I mean, I've been shooting the podcast in the MOV mode, I guess at like 100 megabits per second. But, I could probably shoot it in 28 megabits per second and no one would really notice.
I would notice, Griffin.
You'd notice.
It would break my heart. All right, we got another email from Bob. He's planning on investing in a Lumix 7-14 f4 wide-angle lens for his GH4. He'd like to be able to throw an ND filter on it, yet this lens has no filter threads for a screw-on ND filter. He's saying he can get a matte box and matte box filters, but he already has a nice set of 58 and 77 millimeter ND filters. What do you think about what should he do here?
Well, I forget if I've talked about this. Haven't we talked about this in the podcast, me chopping off part of my lens?
Yes, we have. You treat them very poorly. It's very upsetting to me, but...
Oh yeah, we must have talked about that when we were talking about lens hoods. But this was actually something I brought up at NAB. I was on stage talking about the lenses I use, and I showed everyone my 7-14 millimeter with the lens hood just broken off. And
you said you went at it with a hacksaw.
Yeah.
This is not good, but okay, go ahead.
So before I get to do this DIY solution, one thing that Bob could do is there is a new lens from Panasonic. It's the 8-18 millimeter. So it won't be, it'll be 1 millimeter less wide, which is noticeable at that wide angle end, but it's still very wide. But the 8-18 millimeter, it's actually a really nice lens. It's even better in low light because I think it's an f2.8, and it has a filter ring on top. So you could put ND filters on it without having to bust it. But with my 7-14 millimeter, I chopped off part of the lens hood, and then there's this little piece. I can pull up the product name here. it's discontinued, but it's this little thing called the D-Focus Systems filter thread adapter. It's just a little ring that you can put onto the lens, just slides on, and it has its own filter ring. So now I can get these like 77 millimeter ND filters screwed on top. So that's what I've been doing.
Makes sense.
But I had to break the lens hood because I was using this thing with the ND filters, and the ND filters were not sliding down close enough to the lens, so I was getting vignetting on my shots and just didn't look great.
So you went the hacksaw route. I would just buy the 8-18.
Yeah, maybe buy the new lens.
Hey, if you wanna saw off your lens hoods, go to town.
Although, here's an interesting twist on this question: is that Bob mentions that he's shooting with the GH4, and if he's shooting in 4K on the GH4,
it's a crop.
It does crop in a little bit tighter than the GH5.
Might eliminate that vignetting.
Yeah, so he may not get the vignetting at all. I don't know.
Something to try out before you take a saw to the lens.
Before destroying your lens, maybe try it.
Yeah. Novel.
Yeah.
I think that's it, Griffin. I think we did it. I think we've reached the end of the episode.
We should leave, but we're going to come back next week, as we usually do. And I want to talk about Dan Harmon's Story Circle next week.
Oh, very cool.
So it's one of the ways that even in a documentary filmmaking venue, I am using Dan Harmon's Story Circle to organize my shots, like the way that I ask interview questions and the way that I edit. So I found it very useful as a tool, and I want to talk about that and share that with you all next week.
That sounds great. And you're off on a little vacation, aren't you?
I am, but will have already happened by the time this episode airs.
You're saying we're talking from the future.
Yes.
Griffin, how was your vacation in Barcelona? Was it nice?
I think Barcelona was wonderful.
Well, have a lot of fun, and I look forward to talking to you when you get back.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Boom. We bagged another one. I'm out of coffee.